Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar series. If you have any questions during the presentations this morning, please enter them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 13th edition of Crop Talk. And today we're going to start with a little bit of an update as to what's been going on in the field, some of the things I've been seeing. I was able to go out and do some digging around and got some images of nodules that I'll show you. And then we're going to go into the crop scouting panel, and we've been getting questions about disease and insects, and I think we're right into full-fledged disease and insect kind of season, and I think a lot of producers are out there spraying, so I think it'd be good to just go through some of those questions that have been coming in and kind of update everybody that way. So to start with, just gonna do a little bit of a crop update. So I guess one of the biggest things is boy, are the crops growing fast. They're surprising a lot of people, and it has put a little bit of pressure on weed control. I think a lot of producers were behind on weed control because of the wet conditions, and then now that the crop is growing so fast, they're finding themselves in that staging issues where it's deciding on what to spray, and then some of the weeds are getting fairly big as well. So I think some of those fields are being a little bit under pressure, but I think we're catching up in weed control, and I think probably by the end of this week we'll be seeing a lot of the later seeded crops sprayed already. And we're jumping right into fungicide season. It's went from spraying weeds to spraying fungicides. Basically got the chance to clean out the sprayer, and off you went. Warm temperatures we've been getting. Today's going to be another warm one, and it's high humidities, so it's really got we have perfect conditions for disease. And as I mentioned, we're seeing a lot of producers starting to spray. Seeing a lot of planes in the air. A lot of producers are still under wet conditions, and they're trying to avoid putting a lot of ruts in the field. So we're seeing planes doing a lot of the fungicide application, and even some of the late herbicide applications. I know this morning, talking about high humidities, we definitely had a foggy morning this morning. It was right through till sunup, the fog was there, and that's going to make it for the crop to be damp pretty much right through till dinner time before it gets a chance of drying out. And that's going to again create perfect conditions for disease. Even with the good growing conditions, we're still seeing the crop behind normal, normal would be a lot of the canola right now being in full bloom, a lot of the flax flowering, a lot of the wheat headed out already, and so right now we're still probably a good 2 to 3 weeks behind normal in a lot of areas. Some areas, even a little bit farther. I know talking to some producers in some areas, they're still looking at trying to get some crop in the ground and trying to get some forage in for livestock. So it's still wet in some areas, and producers are still dealing with a lot of the late conditions. And being that we're in about 2 to 3 weeks behind, it also creates some issues that we always try to avoid by seeding early. We always try to get the crop in early in that end of April, beginning of May, so we can avoid the heat at flowering time. And it looks like this year we're going to be at the point when we got a lot of crops will be flowering right during that heat stage. And I already had some producers talking about some of the early canola that's starting to bolt and pot out. We're seeing some aborting of some of those flowers. So now it may not just be the heat that's causing some of that. Some of that could be wet conditions. So, there could be several factors, but we're definitely seeing some of it. And again, it could be basically because of that time of the year. Looking at some of the crops, The early seeded wheat crops are flowering and heading, and which is good. They're right kind of close to being, on time, maybe a week behind. Later seeded crops are in that flag leaf stage and just starting to poke ahead out. So those will be the ones that a lot of producers are going to be watching closely over the next week to 10 days for applying fungicide, especially if the weather conditions continue to be the way they are. Winter wheat and fall rye are pretty much all headed out right now, especially are headed out right now. And there's some fields that I've been seeing in the last week that have been damaged from the heavy rains and winds and hail that we had that aren't looking as good as they had the potential to be. But in general, the winter wheat and fall rye headed out and looking pretty decent actually. Most oats and barley are in the flag leaf stage right now. Some of the early seeded barley starting to head, and again, a lot of those are, just approaching that time when we'll be making some decisions regarding fungicide application. Canola is probably one of the crops that is the most variable throughout the province. We've got some areas in the province where some of the crop is reaching 50% bloom. They were able to get the crop in fast. It was conditions were good for it to germinate and get going. So it's often doing well, but we also have areas where we're still seeing some poor leaf and just starting to cabbage. So those areas are still fairly far behind and a good 3 weeks behind, which again is going to create some issues as we get later on into fall. Regarding the flax anywhere from that 8 to 10 inches tall, early flowering in some areas. I would say the majority is kind of just going to start to flower that I've been seeing, but some of the earlier seeded stuff will definitely be maybe a little bit farther advanced. Soybeans are kind of in the late stages of the vegetative growth and are going to be looking at changing into the reproductive stage. So the go from the V stage to the R stage, and basically starting to see the odd, if you're looking close enough, you're able to see the odd flower on the bottom parts of the plant. And they're beginning to cover the ground, which is good because they'll be able to shade off the ground, and if things tend to dry out a little bit here, hopefully they'll be able to conserve some moisture for that plant as it continues to develop. Talking about soybeans, I was able to get out and do some looking around, and so I was able to mention that this was a good time to check for nodulation. And so here's a plant that I was able to dig out and clean off a lot of the dirt off it, and looking at the nodules, and got some information as to what you should be looking for. There should be, anywhere from 8 to 20 large active nodes per plant just prior to flowering. So pretty much right at this stage is what you should be seeing. If you're sampling too early, so if you're looking and you're not seeing as many as you'd want to be seeing, give it a few days. Maybe you went a little bit on the early side, and maybe go back a week later and resample. One of the things to note too is to note where the nodules are located. If they're located on the main stem or the major part of the stem, you can that'll be from your inoculant that you use this year. And if you're starting to see them out on the branches of the roots, the lateral roots, that could be the ones that nodulation which occurred from what was already in the soil from existing bacteria. So good thing to look at right now. Gives you an opportunity to see how your program is working. The next thing I did is I broke one of those bigger nodules apart, and this is what you want to see. You want to see that pink color or red color in that nodule. That shows you that the nodules are working and they're fixing nitrogen, and so that's definitely a good sign when you see something like that. So those are just a few brief comments about what I've been seeing over the past week, I guess, out in the field. Like I mentioned, I guess there's crop is growing really fast, and I think Maybe one comment about the cereals that I forgot to talk about when I was mentioning the wheat. One comment I got from a producer was, it says my wheat doesn't seem to be growing very fast, and I think you need to get out and actually walk through some of those fields, and you can actually see the tillering and the way the plant is sitting right now. It's just on the verge of kind of busting out and getting into that stem elongation, and it's going to change quite a bit in the next week here. So it may not look tall from the road, but when you get in there, it's amazing how those plants are changing and tillering and developing. So definitely get out there and be looking, and you know, it is a good time to be also out there checking for disease and seeing what you're seeing on those plants. So we've got quite a few questions that have come in over the past week for our crop scouting panel, and I'm gonna start with some of those now. And as we're going through them, there's a few things that we've added in and added some, I guess, some extras this week. So as we go, we might be bouncing back and forth. But the first thing I wanted to show is I wanted to show our Fusarium head blight risk map for, and I guess this would be for yesterday. So as you can see, and I mentioned earlier on that the conditions are pretty good for Fusarium, and our risks are, you know, anywhere from probably on average high to extreme. So I just wanted to see if David had any comments regarding Fusarium, what he's been seeing, and maybe what producers have that he's been talking to, as he's been seeing a lot of spraying happening yet, or are we just on the edge? So David, if you could maybe make a few comments on Fusarium.
Yes, good morning, everybody. There is spraying going on. First thing yesterday morning, I saw a ground rig spraying canola at what was probably the ideal stage, about 30% bloom. And yesterday as well, I did a tour south along the number 3 and across as far as Killarney and then up and back. And I saw quite a number of canola fields that had been sprayed, obvious from the tire tracks. I saw fewer, but some cereal crops that had been sprayed at head blight timing, obviously, recent tracks and heads out of the boot. I did see quite a number of pea fields that had sprayer tracks in, and they were early flowering, that kind of stage, which tells me that that also is probably a fungicide application. So as Lionel says, there's a lot going on right now, and with good reason. The Fusarium map, the risk forecast map, right now it looks pretty serious, and it is. Across most of Agro-Manitoba, we're in the high to extreme risk, and that is because of the humidity that you feel coincidental with warmer or higher, even higher temperatures. The ideal range for infection is above 85% relative humidity, coincidental with temperatures in the ideal range. That's 15 to 30 degrees. Now, I looked just this morning at a 24-hour plot of the conditions here at Carmen, and though humidity was above that through the night, our temperatures at the time dipped down in the 12 to 13 range. So sometimes, even with a lot of humidity, you probably won't be getting infection happening. I guess I just want to caution people, remember that you're applying fungicides if you are as a protectant. So it has to be there before the conditions are perfect for disease. In wheat, which is the easiest to scout and determine, just get off the headlines so that you're looking at something that's representative of the crop. When the main stems, the heads, are fully emerged but not yet flowering, you'll probably have even the first tiller partially emerged. That might be an ideal stage for spraying. And of course, if you're lining up custom equipment, it takes a little time. You might be anticipating how things are shaping up. Besides the daily risk map, I encourage people to have a look at the animated GIF or GIF, depending on how you pronounce it, that's immediately below the risk forecast map. That will show you the progression of risk over the previous 7 days. And that gives you an idea whether it's going up or down in your region. There was a time not too long ago when all of Agro-Manitoba was in the low to moderate range. So that can change very quickly. Sometimes you only have infective conditions for 3 or 4 hours in the nighttime. And in that situation, you'll probably only see one cluster of developing florets. This one in the picture illustrates half of the head infected, and that probably means a longer period coincidental with flowering when the conditions were ideal. Now, again, it's clearest in wheat heads, but they don't flower all at once. The middle florets flower first, and then it goes both up and down the head. And once the anthers are visible, if there hadn't been extreme risk at the time, those developing seeds are no longer vulnerable. They're back inside the glooms and they're protected from infectivity. So this is the reason that maybe this head here was half. I guess I'm repeating myself. Sorry about that. I'll backtrack. I don't know, Lionel, are there any more specific questions about?
Yeah, Dennis, David, sorry. The one comment I got from a producer is timing of application. I guess maybe not as much timing application is conditions when applying.
Oh yeah.
It's when would you say is the best time to be? I know it's a lot of times it's critical to get just, you got acres to do, you got to keep spraying, but
Yeah.
when do you think would be, or what are the kind of the best conditions to be spraying under?
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a question much like that just the day before yesterday, as a matter of fact, and the grower was talking about, is it okay to apply even in the nighttime? Or I think he was really thinking about early morning or a late evening. But he was talking about the heavy dew that we're seeing on the leaves. That might be a little bit of a challenge for fungicide to get through that to the leaf surface where it has to be taken in and have its effect. So it would be preferable to have the foliage a little bit drier when you're applying. But if that is the case in the nighttime with GPS guidance systems, we're not worried about hitting any obstacles in the field. It is possible to spray at night. We don't have really the same concerns with temperature inversions, at least not as far as doing damage to your neighbor's crop. It is always important to get the product onto the target, and you don't want it to lift and disappear somewhere. Nevertheless, those conditions are not as iffy. One thing I'll note is I looked at the product that the producer was talking about using, and it had a rain fastness of 1 hour. So as long as you're not expecting heavy dew to set in or rainfall, actual rainfall within an hour after application, you've done a good job.
Okay, and I think one of the things he was concerned a little bit about was, a prime example would be today where we're going to get a pretty hot day here. Yeah, what happens when it gets to be, 32 in the afternoon. Is there concerns there? What he was saying is, if it's going to get too hot, should I be upping my water, or that, something like that? So
There's nothing on any of the labels about that. No cautions about using the product in hot conditions. Those kind of things might be a concern with insecticides, either where volatilization is an issue, excuse me, or if John is on the call, he'll supply the other reason. Some of the products, fungicides, actually are not as effective when the temperatures are really high. And maybe some of the target insects also move down within the canopy, so they're not as accessible.
okay,
but not the same with any fungicides.
good. Okay, thanks, David.
You're welcome.
You'll be getting some more questions as we go on here. So
Okay.
Okay. Lori, is James on yet, or?
Yep, he sure is. He's on the other side. Yep, I can unmute him.
Great. Okay. James put a thing out on Twitter the other day about AC Saltlander, and I should introduce James. James was on last week. He's the diversification specialist at PCDF up at Roblin, and he put something out on Twitter about AC Saltlander, and that's James standing in their plot of AC Saltlander on saline areas. And I got a couple of calls not long after that, so I thought it'd be good to maybe get James to talk a little bit about what they're doing with that practices and go like that on some salt areas, because I think producers really like that. James, if you could take it away and give us.
Sure. Are you able to hear me okay?
You bet.
Okay, good, because I'm in my vehicle in the middle of nowhere, so it's always good when it works. Yeah, so that's a picture of me. Hopefully, I realize I'm wearing a green shirt, so it's more like a floating head in the middle of nowhere. But Saltlander is something that we were approached by North Star Seeds out of Nipawa last spring, so spring of 2021, about planting a demonstration of it, which we did do. And I guess I was going to say unfortunately, but really fortunately, we don't have much of a salt issue on our land, but unfortunately in the sense that it doesn't necessarily show the potential of the crop under those types of stress situations. But as all of you listening know, it is a big concern for a lot of land, especially, kind of the more southwest part of the province really deals with quite a lot of that. So just a bit of background, as I did some homework on the crop itself, so that I wasn't just talking about our one-off thing, but kind of give you a bit of global perspective on it. It was developed in 2004, I believe, in Saskatchewan, dealing with, looking at ways to remediate land that has been affected by saline. And it has a very deep root, relatively speaking, a deeper root than, for example, intermediate wheatgrass, and is able to kind of punch down through some of that upper layer where the salt is affecting it as badly, and access moisture down below. And the goal there is then to draw the water table down a bit and actually get that salt to move lower into the soil profile. So just to give you a sense then of back to the unique site that we're at, we grew it on an area that was not saline, as I say, and it has performed extremely well. So I'm kind of thinking that there's probably two, although it was developed for working in these saline areas, I think that there may also be broader potential for it as a crop that is, just as part of your regular forage production, and not simply as a remediation tool. Look, I spoke as well with North Star, who, as I said, is marketing it here locally, and they are they're recommending that in these parts of the field where you have these saline areas, it could actually serve as either a monocrop stand or as part of a mixture that could go into some of these areas and potentially be semi-permanent grass stands or forage stands in and among a field that would otherwise potentially be in a annual crop rotation. So that's kind of the application there. And we grew it. Looking at the photos that are here on the screen, we don't have the comparison next door of the intermediate wheatgrass, but that, just for comparison's sake, same condition. It was grown on the same land just next door to where I'm standing there, and it, by comparison, was maybe 3 to 4 feet tall. So less biomass production, and we don't have the feed values yet for that, but I'm assuming that it is going to be pretty good, and at the very least pretty pretty bulky, pretty high biomass volumes there.
Hey James, what about eating?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry. No, that's good. Thank you for that. We seeded it at 8, I believe, pounds an acre, and so sort of it is recommended in that 5 to 10. We just kind of split the difference and round it up a little bit, and then the seeding depth apparently is quite important. So this is under ideal conditions where you can control this in the field, seeding it at about 3/4 of an inch is ideal. 1/2 an inch is apparently just not quite deep enough to get some of that moisture, but then an inch is too much because it has trouble pushing up through that much soil. Just to give you a sense of the seed, if you've ever stripped the head off of quackgrass, it looks more or less identical to quackgrass seed, and apparently that is one of the parent lines for it. It's crossed with I think maybe like a crested wheatgrass or something, and a quackgrass cross. So it does require a fairly good seed bed, and the recommendation really is to roll it afterwards if possible, and that may be very doable if you're seeding it on those smaller areas as a remediation. Just to make sure the rolling is partly just to make sure that you don't have a very large height differential between the bottom of a furrow and then the soil immediately to the side, because then if you do get a rain, the tendency will be for that soil to wash down into the furrow, and suddenly what was 3/4 of an inch is now 1.5 inches. So just to make sure that you've got as level of a seed bed as possible.
Okay, and do you have what would seed approximately cost?
That actually I'm not sure. I did try to dig that up, and I apologize. That was a piece of information I wanted to have, but I think you may need to, if you're interested in it, you may need to get in touch with someone like North Star directly to follow up on that. We were given the seed, and that was already 2 springs ago. I could mention as well sort of the establishment practices. In our case, because we were dealing with a fairly small area, when we seeded it, it like all grasses, it takes a little bit of time to jump out of the ground. And in fact, where we seeded it is, if there is a comparison to be made with a more saline area, it is the fact that we did have a lot of foxtail pressure, which, as you likely know from looking at these saline patches, it tends to be one of the crops that doesn't get too phased by saline, and you'll get that kind of shiny foxtail glow to those patches, and that's a challenge in the fact that those types of plants really do use quite a lot of water in the surface very quickly. So getting rid of that ahead of time is important, whether that's through mowing it and working it up ahead of seeding, and as it does come up, what we did in our case was we mowed it actually twice during the season. So I mowed it just, basically I mowed it when the weeds needed to be mowed. That was how we chose to do it. But another option actually is to use essentially the same, treat it. It has enough wheat genetics in there that what you can do is spray it with what you would spray on a wheat crop at the 2 to 3 leaf stage, and then that's going to help to control some of control the broadleaves for sure. And if you pick your poison correctly, you may be able to get at some of that that foxtail, the foxtail barley and that sort of thing. So those are some of your establishment options. Basically, mowing worked well for us, and then in the second year, the rapid pace of growth, it pretty much has completely outpaced even the millet that did, or the foxtail that was still there. It has kind of just left it in that dwarf stage because it's just far too dark down below there for it to grow well.
Okay, and a question that just came in, you mentioned parentage that might have quackgrass. The root systems of it, when you dig up a plant, is it similar to quackgrass? Does it spread that way, or?
Yeah, that's right. It does spread laterally through the roots, which is actually, at least in this case, a good thing. What I can't comment on is trying to eradicate it out of a patch. If you wanted to then switch it to something else, I don't know how easy or hard that would be. I'm imagining that it's going to be a case of just needing to spray it out rather than try to till it up. But yes, that's a good question. It does spread sideways, and that's encouraging too, where we're trying to establish it in very inhospitable conditions. Even if the stand doesn't take really thickly at first, you can anticipate that it would begin to work itself out into the margins of that patch well.
Okay, good. I think that's all I have for you, James. Thanks very much for stopping on the side of the road and
You bet.
And bringing us this information. Like I said, I think it's creating some interest, and I think it's something that I know that's been out there for a few years, but it just, I think as we still dealing with saline areas, it's something we should be looking a little bit more at.
Yeah, and maybe just my final thoughts here would be, again, just to reiterate that potentially, whereas it was developed as a saline specific thing, it may have the production we're seeing at our home site, it may have a good fit even outside of those areas as a stand-in for good biomass production. And then just follow up on what we've done at our site, we're gonna have a feed test done on that, and I will be sharing that information on our PCDF website, which is mbdiversificationcenters.ca, and I can also make sure to tag it onto the Twitter feed that I had started. So that'll hopefully, if you're curious, you can follow up that way.
Yeah, that's good. It'd be good to see what the feed value is. So yeah, good. Keep us up to date, and thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next, I guess, question that has come up, and it's regarding the peas. I've taken a few pictures. These are the peas that on June the 25th were hailed out, and that's what they looked like on June the 25th, and this is what they look like on July the 9th. So there's a couple questions that have come up from this producer, because he also has fields that weren't hailed out and look fairly good as well. So I guess the questions are going to be for Dave Kaminsky and Dennis Lang. I guess he's looking about spraying for disease. Maybe a brief description, Dave, of Mycospirella, what to look for if you're going out there to look for that in peas, and maybe some comments regarding spraying and just general, I guess, what to do when or should you be concerned about spraying peas right now, and if you guys can make some comments that way.
Okay, yes, I'm unmuted, so I'll go first, and I see Dennis has just appeared, so I'm sure he'll want to comment about this as well. At the crop diagnostic school, Dennis distributed a one-pager from our friends at the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers, and it shows both staging and some disease impacts. The picture that Lionel has on his screen there shows you the very first symptoms of Microsphaerella blight on some of the lower leaves. That's where you'll find them, and it probably moves its way up through the canopy from the base. We know there's also bacterial blight there, and that one will probably be made worse by the hail damage. As far as fungicide timing application, your aim is to protect the developing pods. Of course, you need some foliage to support them, but there, sorry, I got a frog in my throat. There is a lot of photosynthetic area, even in the tendrils. So you've got that to support the filling of pods, but it's generally at a stage. There are a lot of different fungicides registered for Microsphaerella blight, and there is a range of timings and also pre-harvest intervals. You should maybe look at the product you're considering and check out those two factors. But Dennis, are you going to jump in? I think the ideal stage to begin, if you are, is at just the onset of flowering, or perhaps a few flowers out, so you have the first protopods developing.
Yes, I'm here now. I guess scouting time would be right around early flowering, and we should be, some fields already started to flower already. I guess the other thing you're looking for in the lower canopy is those purple freckles like you see on the image here. And sometimes you have to kind of spread the canopy back to really have a closer look. And, to address the question that Lionel had posed earlier about what diseases to find in that hail field, the one thing you might be seeing is you might be starting to see some bacterial blight start to show up with that. Usually that's what ends up happening with when you have some severe weather that goes through. And there's a few distinguishing factors when you're looking at trying to distinguish whether it's Microsphaerella or bacterial. One of the first things is with Microsphaerella, it's more about purpling discoloration, like purple freckles, where bacterial is more yellow or brown with, sometimes you see a bit of a yellowish ring around it. The other thing, one of the distinguishing factors is that with bacterial blight, the lesion generally stays within the veins. It doesn't go across the veins as the disease develops. So with a bacterial blight as well, you might see it more widespread across the field given the weather that we've had, and that's more just related to the environmental. But Microsphaerella, at the school last week, we actually had a little experiment where we actually spread some straw from one of the fields of peas last year in our plots to see if we could get more infection, and that was successful. And that just tells us that even on a dry year, that the Microsphaerella is there. And we encourage you to, if you go to the Manitoba Pulse Grower website or just do a quick Google search, you can Google the Microsphaerella checklist. And that checklist will kind of walk you through what to look for, and also kind of give you a rating scale on your crop to determine whether it's at the correct timing for spraying. Ideally, when you use that rating score, you want to be at least at 65 before you spray. And the reason we do that is so that when we're targeting spray application, we want to target the best timing. And sometimes that best timing might be delayed a little bit, just because every field's going to have Microsphaerella at some point during the growing season, but the later it sets in, the better. So if you don't have Microsphaerella pressure now, but maybe in a week you want to spray, that might be long enough to carry you through to early pod fill. So that's kind of what you're targeting. So.
Can you
Hey,
jump in again? Dennis spoke, sorry, Lionel.
go
Dennis
ahead.
spoke at the diagnostic school about staging, and I guess he was talking at the time a lot about herbicide timing. But he pointed out that at the base of the plant, we have the scalar nodes, which look different from the true nodes, where there are these elephant ear-shaped stipules on either side of the stem. This year, a lot of times the scalar nodes ended up being above the ground because most people were seeding a little shallower, hoping to get that crop up and out of the ground. Often they're underneath the soil. But it is those two scalar nodes from which you'll get branching and new growth if you've had kind of a complete wreck from hail. So I don't think that happened necessarily in the example that Lionel is showing. But of course, maturity is going to be delayed, and it might be tricky if you're thinking of nodes as your guide. As Dennis says, that checklist comes in pretty handy to know whether all the factors are in place for mycorrhiza to set in.
Yeah, one of the big things that you're really looking at is the flowering. The scale nodes kind of take over when the main growing point is damaged, and that's what we saw in some of these cases here last, with Lionel's field here. But I just encourage growers to go out and check, because it is interesting. Some canopies are really dense, and they've had good moisture, and those would be really good candidates for that early spray. But if it's a little on the drier side and the stand's a little thinner, those are candidates maybe where you could delay your spraying a little bit. But you have to treat it on a field by field basis rather than a broad blanket of recommendations. So.
Okay, thanks, guys. And being that Dennis had talked about the calculator that the pulse growers have for peas, we have Darren Bond on today, and I'm going to give the screen over to him, and he's going to talk a little bit about our Fusarium and Sclerotinia Manitoba Ag calculators. So Darren, if you want to take it away.
Sure, thanks Lionel. Could you just let me know if you can see my screen? It's our homepage on the website.
You bet.
Okay, awesome. So we have some calculators, going to go through two of them, and just show how to quickly find them. This is just our homepage here. And if we go down to cost of production calculators, this does bring up our tab for all of our different calculators for cost of production. So today we're going to focus on disease calculators, and we have two of them, and they're in the crop section here. And the first one that we're going to look at is a crop disease break-even calculator. So we have two options here, online Excel. The online one is actually phone friendly, tablet friendly, so that's the one we're going to use. And it's something that we actually just released a couple months ago. So it's a pretty exciting step up in technology, and it allows it to be mobile and something you can do from the edge of the field. So what I found in the last years that we've had a lot of change. Remember the times when hard red spring wheat was $6.50, $7 a bushel, then urea was $400, $450 a ton, canola was 10 to 12 bucks a bushel. Well, things have really changed. We have urea in that $11, $12, $1,300 range. Wheat, new crop wheat did hit 15 bucks. It's pulled back quite a bit since then, and it's around 11.50 new crop right now, ballpark. Canola, new crop was 25 bucks. It's pulled back to 18.50. There's a lot of change going on, and I think that whether you're a producer or an advisor, we felt that we had a good understanding and an intuition about how things work when it comes down to decision making and when to undertake certain actions. With these new numbers, it's kind of thrown that off kilter, and our new equilibrium and our ability to make those intuitive decisions, I think will come to us. But with all these changes and all these numbers and all this volatility, just talk about those crop prices, how much they varied in the last month. it's very important to use numbers when it comes down to decision making. And this is part of using these tools, is combining the agronomic component of decision making, coupling it with the economic portion of decision making. And if we can hit that sweet spot, we're truly making great decisions and moves on the farm. So the first one I want to show you, we have this disease break-even calculator used for Fusarium and Sclerotinia, and I'm going to show wheat on that, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through a couple different scenarios here. We can pick what type of crop we want, and again, for this one, we're going to go with hard red spring wheat just for demonstration purposes. We can change the crop here to our numbers. So I'm going to put in 60 bushels an acre just for a number, and we can put in an estimated price. So let's put in 1150 new crop price. We can move into the disease treatment, so the cost portion of the calculator. We could do treatments, fungicides, and apps. We're going to get rid of the seed treatment. We're just going to look at, say, a Fusarium control application. We can change all these numbers here to what suits us, and we'll take a generic $15 an acre fungicide pass. And let's just say our application costs for this example are going to be $8 an acre. So we can input what we expect to get for the benefit or the yield and price, and we can put in the cost portion. And then we can start doing some analysis to see where does this break even, where are the points where we start to see profit out of this. So it's broke down into two sections here. With wheat has a bit of an advantage, if you will. I'm using air quotation. A bit of an advantage is that there's a benefit when you're spraying for Fusarium. You could see a yield benefit, and you could also see a quality improvement or a grade improvement, which could lead to a price improvement. So we're going to look at both scenarios here. So if we look in the green under the yield break even, we can see here 2 bushels an acre. What this is saying is that for our treatment cost, and the formulas are down here, for our treatment cost, we would need 2 bushels an acre to break even. So anything over 2 bushels an acre, and we're starting to see profit. If we were to look at just grade or just a price increase, we would need 38 cents a bushel to break even. So anything over that, we're starting to be in the profit situation. Now those are just looking at yield only and price only. But if we combine the two, and this is in the yellow or kind of the golden color, we could see that if we get 1 bushel an acre increase plus 19 cents per bushel in a price increase, that's the break even there. Because again, of course, we're looking at benefit not only in yield, but also potentially in quality. So this clears the clutter and allows us to see what these are. And I'll throw a couple of other scenarios up here, just some kind of extremes, just to show how with these new numbers, it does take a bit of a moment to take a look at things to see where we find that equilibrium. So if we were to go into our yield and put in 25 bushels an acre, which hopefully we won't see again this year. There was enough of those yields last year, and put in a $10 price. We can see in this scenario we're at 2.3 bushels an acre. We would need to cover that cost, or 92 cents a bushel for a grade increase, or if we split the difference and take in both the yield and price, we're at 1.2 bushels an acre, or nearly 50 cents a bushel, 46 cents a bushel for a break even. So this is showing some numbers that we can, depending on what you're going to get for value and what you're going to incur for cost, we can start to see what we need to get back. If we're to look at more, say, a couple years ago, or traditional value, if we're going to ramp up that yield and let's go with a lower price, we can see down here that we need just over 3 bushels an acre, or 30 cents, 31 cents a bushel value. If we were to split the difference, again, 1.6 bushels or 15 cents a bushel. So it actually gets to be kind of neat to play with some of these numbers to see where the point of profit is, and to be able to make those decisions. And again, coupling something like this with some good agronomics assessments of the risk potential, and looking at protecting what's out there, and knowing what you need in return for that cost of protection allows you to make some educated decisions. Lionel, are there any questions, or does anyone want to see any different scenarios or anything like that for this one before I move on to canola?
I think we're good right now, Darren. Maybe hit on to the canola one.
Okay, so just before I do, we do have a canola break-even one in this. So this is going to be looking at what it costs to break even. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because we actually have a one that's suited for Sclerotinia, and looking at the risk factors. But we can see in this situation, we would require 1.3 bushels per acre. So if you notice here, there's no price increase. This is just looking at yield, unless we're talking about a crazy extreme circumstance. Generally, the impact for Sclerotinia spraying is on yield. So this, we can look at what are we going to need, and we can really see that, you know, as these prices go crazy on terms of what's out there for potential yield, and then what the grain price is, this will move around. But we do have a really good calculator for Sclerotinia, and I'm back on our cost of production page here. And if we find our Sclerotinia treatment decision tool for canola, which again is phone friendly, and you can use it at the edge of the field to make decisions, we come in with a calculator that looks at the scoring or the risk factors of the Sclerotinia pressure, looks at the economic factors, meaning the yield potential, the estimated price, and then treatment costs, and then looks at what type of profitability and whether it's worthwhile spraying. So starting with these risk factors, this is data, and this has been around for a while, this risk matrix. Canola Council has it. I believe it was developed in Sweden some years ago. The challenge when it was developed when canola was around 8 to 10 bucks a bushel, and I do believe they said at the time, and David can definitely correct me if I'm wrong here, risk scoring of around 30 to 40 points could start to indicate that it's worthwhile to spray, but canola has doubled since that was made, or even tripled in some cases, depending on when you look at the pricing. The yield potential of canola through genetics has improved a lot. So that linkage maybe doesn't necessarily hold. And as this canola crop is worth more, and as there's more yield, more price, our thresholds for treating this do get lower. Now, of course, disease has to be there. There has to be the agronomic backing to spray. But again, just because these crops are worth so much, who would think that canola will be grossing $1,000 an acre in some situations? We really need to make that management decision if it's worthwhile spraying. So just quickly walking through this risk factor, you answer a handful of questions, and it comes up with a risk rating on points. So the number of years in the rotation, whether it's a tight rotation, medium rotation, or a longer rotation, we'll say 3 years to 6 years. The disease incidence in last host, whether we didn't have any, or whether it was high. And I'm just picking some numbers here just for demonstration. Our crop density, whether it's a low, normal, or high crop density. The amount of rain that we've had in the last 2 weeks, obviously the more rain, the higher the points in the risk rating. What the weather forecast is going to be, whether we're going to have clear skies, or whether it's going to be cloudy, possibly rainy, or whether it's variable. And then the numbers for the regional risk for the continued development, whether we have no numbers, high numbers, low numbers. It all adds up to a certain risk rating. We put in our yield here, and we can change this as we see fit. We can change our estimated price and fungicide cost and application costs. And if we move down to the analysis portion, what this gives us is based on those risk rating numbers, it gives us a potential infection range. And then it looks at the low side of the infection range to say what the returns could be, looks at the high side, what the returns could be, and gives a profitability, probability ranking. And what this one is saying, that it's uncertain if it's beneficial to spray, because it depends. If you're at the low end of the infection range, likely you won't see a return. But if you're on the high end, you can see the return. And again, what this does is allows us to make some educated decisions. We can play with some numbers. I always suggest, whether it's a producer advisor, for putting in the estimated canola yield, that's what a reasonable estimation could be, but we can change it, and we can say if we think that maybe because of the late seeding and some of the challenge we've had, that we won't see as great of a yield. We can see that again, we're still in the uncertain range, because it depends what the infection range could be. But if again, we start to see that there's maybe some more rain that has fallen in the last 2 weeks, and we're looking at maybe a bit more rain in the forecast, all of a sudden those changes can move us into a higher potential infection range, and just those moves there moves us into a greater certainty of profitability and return on the spray investment, because again, the risk raters are essentially saying that there's greater chance of disease development. So it's a pretty good little tool. Again, it's something that you bookmark, throw it on your home screen on your phone, or bookmark it, use it right at the edge of the field, and run a couple of different scenarios and see. This is not meant to replace good agronomic decision making. The clear yes decisions and the clear no decisions, you won't need to be consulting a tool like this. What this is meant to do is to help with those shades of gray, or the maybe it's beneficial. And especially with the new numbers and the new world order and everything that's going on with the volatility and variability with everything, this is meant to aid in that decision making, so that when you're going through the different scenarios and looking at the conditions that persist and the different types of options that are out there, this is just meant to help you in that, and again, not meant to replace that. The other thing is that I find, in speaking with producers who've used this in the past, when we've had that spray decision uncertain, where there's that range of, there might be a slight loss or there might be a slight gain, for producers who might say be straight cutting their canola, and they have a lower tolerance for sclerotinia because they want their crop to stand up better, they might say, well, you know what, it's a little uncertain whether I'm going to see a return, but we want to make sure that we protect this so we have an easier time straight cutting it, and we don't have lodging issues or anything like that. So it's funny how those types of things start to come into this decision-making process with this. So with that, Lionel, that kind of wraps up what I wanted to go through. And yeah, if there's any questions or any scenarios people want to see, or fire away.
Okay, Darren, right now we don't have any questions, but we'll continue on, and if there's something comes up, I will bring it upwards here. So thanks for doing this, Darren. Good to see that we're able to take that out to the field with our phones now too. So that's a good thing. Okay, okay, so back to talking about peas and fungicide applications. And a lot of times in the past, a lot of producers would throw in an insecticide for aphids if they're seeing aphids in the field. And I just thought it'd be good if John can maybe give us a little bit of an update on what we should be doing when we're checking for aphids in peas as they're starting to flower now. And I think a lot of people will be out there checking in the fields.
Sure. So flowering time is the appropriate time to be checking for aphids in peas. What you really need to be protecting is the very young pods. That's where the economic damage is greatest. But flowering is a good time to be doing your assessments. And you can do it in two ways. You can either use a sweep net, or you can just visually observe the upper roughly 20 centimeters of the plant tips in a few areas of the field and make your assessments based on your plant tips. And we do have a table on our website. We have a pea aphid fact sheet, and it has a table that relates sweep net numbers to the plant tip counts. Once you get to the point where you're getting about 9 to 12 aphids per sweep, so that would be 90 to 120 if you're doing a 10 sweep sample, then you're looking at about a 5 to 6% yield loss, and that's what we consider the economic threshold. And if you're doing the plant tip sampling, it takes just 2 to 3 aphids per plant tip on average to be in that 5 to 6% yield loss range. And most of that yield loss would be from less seeds or smaller seeds, and due to feeding when the pods were elongating. Once the seeds are fairly well formed, it's too late. But what you need to be protecting is the young developing pods, and flowering is a good time to be out scouting, looking at those levels. And just if you're trying to time an insecticide, the ideal timing is when roughly half the plants have some young developing pods, but tank mixing in with a fungicide would be appropriate timing as well if you're above that economic threshold. Some people have been sending me photos of aphid mummies from peas, so that means there's parasites in your population. So there is a little bit of parasitism out there this year, and in a wet and warm year, or if we get some wet and warm conditions, we may see more fungal pathogens in the population as well. But use those thresholds I mentioned earlier to help with your decision making.
Okay, and well, I have you on, John. Maybe if you could just make a couple comments regarding our diamondback moth numbers and our Bertha armyworm numbers, because as we're going to be looking in the canola fields for spraying fungicides there, it might not be a bad time to start checking out for these guys.
Monitoring is always good and recommended. Now, on the positive side, for people in western Manitoba, diamondback moth traps, all the high counts were in the eastern part of the province, the area around Beausejour, Whitemouth, Steed, they had some higher counts. The western part of the province, relatively speaking, counts were pretty low for diamondback moth. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be out there looking. It's, again, good to be tapping some plants and seeing if you can be knocking off the larva. But as far as risk goes based on the trap counts, certainly the greater risk was in the eastern part of the province for diamondback moth. Bertha armyworm traps, there's nothing even close to moderate risk. Everything's still in the low risk category from our traps. So we'll keep you posted with that. There's still a few weeks of trapping left to go, but so far our highest counts are in the 50 range, and we have to get above 300 to move out of the low risk range. So still low risk for Bertha armyworm. One thing I do like to stress, though, is don't just tank mix in an insecticide with your fungicide when spraying canola if you don't have economic insects, because pollinators do give you a 10 to 15% yield boost. And if you don't have those economic insect populations and you tank mix in that insecticide just in case, you may inadvertently decrease or eliminate that yield boost the pollinators are giving you. So there is that trade-off there. This is why, again, spraying canola in flower, you want to make sure that there's an economic insect population there, or you could be doing more harm than good.
Really good points, John, especially about spraying a canola. So yeah, that's perfect. One quick question I had, somebody asked me, is our numbers are low, would that be because of all the rain and winds we've been having, or?
Well, Bertha armyworm goes in cycles, and everything was low risk last year as well. So they just haven't increased in their cycle yet. Diamondback moth is really dependent on the winds. They don't overwinter well in the Canadian prairies. Primarily what we get blows in and depends where they get dumped. So I think the eastern part was just a little bit more unfortunate, and where the diamondback seem to have gotten deposited. But that being said, I haven't had any reports of high levels of the diamondback larvae yet in the east. We can find them, but I haven't had any reports of high levels. So we'll just keep our fingers crossed that that remains the same. But with both of those, well, with diamondback in particular, like wind is important. With Bertha, it's a combination of weather and natural enemies that keep them low.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. And I think for sake of time, we're going to go to a few of the things that are happening in the province regarding field days. I wanted to mention the Diversification Center field days, July the 20th, 26th, July 27th, and the 9th. They're all there. They have some really good days there, really good information. So definitely keep those on your calendar. A new one that's come up, the Manitoba 4R Nitrogen Management Field Tour, July 29th at the University of Manitoba. If you're wanting information of that, contact John Hurd. Would be a good contact to get the information regarding registration, and they'd like you to register before July 22nd. I got this one yesterday about a college, Combine College. It's going to be happening in July 26th at Fairgrounds in Dauphin, and on July 28th at Portage la Prairie. So it's meant for producers and industry people. So if you're interested in learning something there, definitely take those into account. With disease and insects starting to become more of a target for us right now, I think the weed guide is, or the field crop protection guide is something that you should have for the information about spraying rates, times, application timing, all that kind of stuff. It's all in there. So grab one of those books. If you got questions, contact any of the ag adaptation specialists. There's our contact information and our locations. We're into haying season. If you got questions regarding putting up hay and quality of putting up hay, give these people a call. They can definitely help you with working us through some of that. Numbers for our ag services centers. So if you got questions regarding your crop and want somebody to come out, or want to get information about your insurance, I should say, definitely give these offices a call. And our contact information, mine and Lori's. So if you want to get a hold of us, you got questions, you'd want to hear something that we brought up on one of the next crop talks, definitely give us a call or send us an email. So that's it for today. See you next week, July 20th, for our next crop talk. And thanks for our presenters and the panel. Lots of good questions came in, and hopefully we got some answers out there. So thanks for attending, and see you next week.